One coin. That's all it took to decide whether a family ate that night or didn't. We tend to think of money in Jesus' time as simply an older version of what we use today. Ancient coins, yes, but serving the same basic function. You earn, you spend, you save. Simple, familiar, manageable. But that picture is wrong. What if a single small coin, worth less than a day's wage, could mean the difference between feeding your children and watching them go to sleep hungry? What if losing one coin, just one, could unravel weeks of careful survival? What if the entire moral and social weight of a community was woven into the metal discs that passed from hand to hand in the markets of Galilee? Stay until the end, because understanding this changes how we read the Gospels and why Jesus talked about money more than almost any other subject. The year is roughly 30 AD. You are standing in the lower district of a Galilean town, Capernaum perhaps, or a village just outside Nazareth. The street beneath your feet is not paved. It is compacted earth, dusty in summer, slick with mud in winter, permanently marked by the passage of sandaled feet and the hooves of donkeys carrying loads of grain. The air smells of charcoal smoke, animal dung, freshly baked flatbread, and the faint metallic tang of the fish being salted and dried near the shore. The sun is already intense by mid-morning. There are no awnings on most buildings. People work in the heat because there is no alternative. The homes here are small. 1 or 2 rooms built from dark basalt stone, low ceilings, packed earth floors, small high windows designed not to let in light but to keep out heat. A family of 5 or 6 shares this space. The cooking is done in a corner or in a small courtyard shared with neighbors. There is no separation between sleeping, eating, and working. Life happens in the same few square meters every day without exception. If you've been following this channel for a while, you already know that we take this kind of historical reconstruction seriously. We go slow, we go deep. If you're new here, consider subscribing. This is the kind of content we bring you every week, the real world behind the biblical text. In this economy, there is no middle class in any modern sense. There are landowners and merchants, a small minority who control most of the resources. And then there is everyone else, tenant farmers, day laborers, fishermen, artisans, widows, servants. People who live not month to month but day to day, sometimes hour to hour. The primary coin in daily circulation was the lepton, the smallest denomination in use. In Greek it means literally the thin one. It was worth half a quadrans, which itself was 1/64th of a denarius. A denarius was a full day's wage for a common laborer. The lepton, therefore, represented roughly 128th of what a man could earn in a day of hard physical work. And yet, it was not nothing, not even close. To understand what one coin could buy, you have to first understand what things cost. Not in numbers, but in weight, in effort, in time. A day laborer in Galilee around 30 AD earned roughly 1 denarius for a full day's work in the fields or at a construction site. 12 hours of physical labor under the open sky, bending, lifting, carrying, hauling stone, or harvesting grain. 1 denarius. That coin would purchase approximately 1 kilogram of wheat flour, enough to make flatbread for a family for a day or two if portions were modest. Olive oil, the essential fat of the Mediterranean world, was more expensive. A small clay jar of oil suitable for a week of cooking could cost several days of wages during seasons when the harvest had been poor. Now place the lepton inside this picture. 1 lepton could buy a small handful of dried figs or a portion of salted fish, the cheapest available protein, the food of the poor, not the fresh catch reserved for wealthier tables. It could purchase a bundle of firewood small enough to fit under 1 arm. In the right market, at the right hour, when a vendor needed to clear his remaining stock before sundown, 1 lepton might secure a fistful of lentils, a few cloves of garlic, a small piece of dried meat. Nothing abundant, nothing comfortable, but something. And in a world where something was the barrier between a child sleeping fed and a child sleeping hungry, that distinction was enormous. The markets of Galilee opened early. By sunrise, the narrow lanes between the stone stalls were already crowded. Women with clay jars balanced on their heads, merchants calling out prices, children running errands, money changers seated on low wooden benches with their scales and their stacks of coins arranged by denomination. The sound was constant, haggling, bargaining, the clinking of metal, the bleating of a goat tied to a post nearby. Every transaction was negotiated. There were no fixed prices in the modern sense. What you paid depended on who you were, how you dressed, whether the merchant recognized you, what time of day it was, and how desperate either party appeared. A stranger from another village might pay more for the same handful of grain than a local widow known to everyone. Poverty was not invisible here. It was worn on the body, read in posture, communicated in the texture of a garment, the condition of sandals, the presence or absence of rings on the fingers. To enter the market without money was to enter as a ghost. You could see, smell, hear, but you could not participate. You had no weight in the transaction, no voice in the exchange. This is why losing even one small coin was not a minor inconvenience. It was a fracture in the thin membrane that separated a person from full social invisibility. When Jesus told the story of a woman who had 10 coins and lost one, lighting a lamp, sweeping the entire house, searching until she found it, every person listening understood the stakes immediately. Not because they had read commentaries, because they had lived it. That woman in the parable, she is not a wealthy householder who misplaced a decorative piece. She is someone for whom 10 coins represents a carefully guarded reserve, a buffer against catastrophe, the kind of small accumulation that takes weeks, sometimes months, to build. One lepton at a time, set aside after every modest transaction, every small job completed, every favor returned in currency rather than kind. 10 coins. In the world of 30 AD Galilee, that might represent the equivalent of 10 days of survival. Not comfort, survival. Grain, oil, firewood, a small portion of protein, the bare structure of a household functioning. Losing 1/10 of that reserve was not a rounding error. It was a wound. The houses where most Galilean families lived were designed unintentionally to swallow small objects. The floors were packed earth, dark, uneven, often covered with a thin layer of dried rushes or straw that had been spread to absorb moisture and odor. In the corners, clay storage jars sat half buried in the ground to maintain cool temperatures. Wooden tools leaned against walls. Folded textiles were stacked on low shelves cut into the stone. Sandals, ropes, small agricultural implements. Everything shared the same floor-level space. A coin dropped in that environment did not sit waiting to be found. It disappeared. It slipped between the rushes, rolled into a corner, settled into a crack in the earth. In the dim interior light, the small window admitting only a narrow column of sunlight, a lepton was nearly impossible to see with the naked eye without artificial illumination. This is why the woman in Jesus' story lit a lamp, not for dramatic effect, because it was the only practical way to find something that small, in that kind of space, in that level of darkness. And then she swept, carefully, methodically, pushing the rushes and the dust toward the center of the room, watching for the glint of metal. She swept the entire house, every corner, every shadow. The Greek word used in the parable suggests a thorough, systematic search, not a quick glance around the room. This was not an overreaction. This was the only rational response to what had been lost. Jesus told this story back to back with the parable of the lost sheep, a shepherd leaving 99 animals to search for one. And both of these stories were told in direct response to a specific accusation leveled against Jesus by the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, that he welcomed sinners and ate with them. The accusation was social and moral simultaneously. In that world, table fellowship was not casual. Who you ate with communicated who you considered honorable, who you considered clean, who you accepted as part of your community. To eat with tax collectors, men who collaborated with Roman financial extraction and were widely understood to be cheating their own neighbors, was not merely informal socializing. It was a public statement about worth and belonging. Jesus answered that accusation not with a theological argument, but with two images drawn entirely from the material reality of daily life. A shepherd, a woman, a lost animal, a lost coin. Not abstract, not distant, immediate, tactile, and undeniable. There is something in those two parables that becomes visible only when you understand the economy behind them, and it has nothing to do with sentimentality. The shepherd who leaves 99 sheep to search for one is not being irrational. In that world, livestock was capital. A single sheep represented not just meat or wool, but a living asset, collateral against a bad harvest, a future bride price, insurance against illness or drought. Losing one was a measurable financial blow. Finding it was not merely emotional relief, it was the recovery of something that had real, concrete weight in the survival calculations of a household. The woman who finds her coin does not weep quietly in private gratitude. She calls her neighbors and friends together and says, "Rejoice with me." In a village economy built on mutual obligation and collective memory, this celebration had social meaning. Her reserve was intact. Her household had not slipped backward. The thin margin between stability and vulnerability had been restored, and the community witnessed it. This is the world in which Jesus made his central claim about what God does with what is lost. Not a distant administrative deity issuing decrees from outside the human condition, but something far closer to a woman on her knees in a dark room, lamp in one hand, pushing dust with the other, searching with complete attention for the one thing that had gone missing. The 30 pieces of silver paid to Judas Iscariot, the most infamous transaction in the New Testament, were 30 shekels. By the standards of Exodus, that was the legal compensation for a slave killed by an ox. Not a grand sum, not a fortune. Roughly equivalent to 4 months of a laborer's wages. Significant, yes, but not the kind of wealth that transforms a life. The weight of that number was not in its purchasing power. It was in its symbolism. 30 shekels for a life. A life priced at the legal value of a dead slave. The priests who paid it and the man who accepted it both knew exactly what that number communicated. In a world where every coin had a denomination, a face, a weight, and a meaning embedded in law and custom and collective memory, choosing 30 shekels was not an accident of negotiation. It was a statement. And the man who had spent his public ministry telling stories about lost coins, about the reckless generosity of a father running toward a returning son, about a woman sweeping her floor by lamplight. That man was valued by those who wanted him removed at the price of a slave. The coins of 30 AD were small, heavy, worn smooth by thousands of hands. They carried the faces of emperors and the inscriptions of powers that would not last. They changed hands in dusty markets, were hidden under earthen floors, were lost and found, spent and saved, counted and recounted by people trying to hold their lives together in a world with very little margin for error. Jesus knew that world from the inside. He was not observing poverty from a distance. He was speaking from within it, to people inside it, using the language of their daily survival to say something they could not unhear. That is why those words have lasted 2,000 years.